All right, welcome. When you think of the Roman Empire, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Probably famous names, right? Julius Caesar, Augustus, maybe some epic battles. But what if I told you the real secret to its power? The reason it lasted so long wasn't a person, but a machine? Today, we're going to look under the hood at the systems that made Rome work.
I mean, it's a question that historians have been obsessed with forever. Was it really just a string of brilliant generals and all-powerful emperors? Was it just luck?
Well, the real answer, the one we're going to unpack today, lies in the incredible systems Rome built. We're talking military, social, and political systems. So let's start with the absolute engine of the empire, its army. To really get the empire, you have to understand the utter chaos that came right before it. See, in the late Republic, armies weren't loyal to Rome. Not at all. They were loyal to powerful, charismatic generals, guys who promised them land and loot. And this system, it fueled a century of just brutal civil wars, as men like Marius, Sulla, and Caesar turned their personal armies against the state itself.
Augustus's genius was to see this broken system and completely rewire it. He basically turned the army into a professional, state-funded career. You didn't just sign up for a summer campaign, you enlisted for a 20-year career. And your loyalty? It was tied directly to the state, because the state, not some ambitious general, was the one signing your paychecks and, crucially, guaranteeing your retirement pension.
And this one change was absolutely revolutionary. By cutting that personal bond between soldiers and their generals, Augustus took away the main fuel for civil war. Just like that. He created this stable military machine that would go on to secure the empire for centuries. A force that was loyal to the idea of Rome, not just to the men leading it into battle.
Okay, so we've got this incredible military machine that Augustus built. But what was it all protecting? Let's take a look at what life was actually like inside the cities of the empire.
So what did this army protect? Well, it protected a surprisingly standardized way of life. It didn't matter if you were in Britain or way out in Syria, a Roman city had certain things: paved roads, aqueducts, law courts. But this wasn't just about comfort. It was a system of control. The free grain dole, that kept the city folk happy and fed. The public baths, they weren't just for getting clean. They were the social and business hubs of the entire community. All this infrastructure, it made you feel Roman. And this slide really shows you the stark difference. Inside the borders, life was predictable, it was structured. Outside, in what the Romans called the barbarian territories, life was so precarious. Your survival literally depended on the strength of your local chieftain and the luck of the harvest. If your crops failed or a rival tribe raided your village, well, tough luck. There was no imperial safety net on its way to save you. And that stability right there was Rome's greatest selling point. You know, a lot of the people living on the borders didn't actually want to destroy Rome. They wanted in. They wanted access to the security and the opportunity that this incredible system provided.
But, every system has a potential flaw, a bug in the code. And for Rome, one of the biggest threats grew right next to the emperor's throne. I'm talking about the Praetorian Guard.
So the Praetorians were created to be the emperor's elite, loyal protectors, but they very quickly became his masters. As you can see here, they went from being bodyguards to gatekeepers and then to assassins and kingmakers. It proved a fatal truth of the imperial system. Whoever controls the troops in the capital city controls the entire empire. And yes, it got so corrupt that they would literally auction off the throne to the highest bidder. Just wild. Now, while the political system was being corrupted from the inside by military power, the whole social system was facing a challenge from a completely different direction. A new faith, Christianity, was spreading like wildfire, and its followers, they refused to participate in the old state cults, which were seen as absolutely essential for Rome's divine favor. This wasn't just a religious disagreement, it was a fundamental challenge to the very definition of what it meant to be Roman. The 3rd century was just a nightmare for Rome. Plagues, constant invasions, economic collapse, the whole system was shaking. And it led one emperor to a pretty radical conclusion. The empire was simply too big, too unstable, and too complex to be ruled the old way anymore. So Emperor Diocletian came up with this radical solution called the Tetrarchy, the rule of 4. The idea was to make the empire more manageable by chopping it up, with emperors positioned much closer to the threatened frontiers. Power started shifting away from the old capital, Rome. It was a really bold attempt at systemic reform, but the system just couldn't outlast the man who created it. As soon as Diocletian retired, his co-emperors immediately fell into another civil war.
The winner of that civil war, Constantine, reunited the empire, but he also solidified the divide for good. In 330 AD, he built a brand new capital in the east, Constantinople. It was richer, it was easier to defend, and, this is key, it was built as a Christian city. All the wealth, the power, the best and brightest of the empire, they all followed him east, leaving the old Latin-speaking west to kind of wither on the vine.
And with the empire now permanently split, the weaker, less wealthy western half became incredibly vulnerable. I mean, it had its own administration, its own problems, and frankly, it was often laughably weak.
And then, in 439 AD, came the blow, the one from which the West would just never recover. A Germanic tribe, the Vandals, did the unthinkable. They crossed the Mediterranean and conquered the absolutely vital province of North Africa.
This was the fatal economic blow. It's that simple. North Africa was the breadbasket of the West. It's where the grain came from, it's where the tax money came from. So you lose Africa, you lose tax revenue. You lose tax revenue, you can't pay your soldiers. And if you can't pay your soldiers, you can't defend your borders. It's a death spiral.
So there was no epic final battle for Rome, no blaze of glory. The Western Roman Empire ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. It was a state of what you might just call emperor fatigue. The Germanic commander who was really in charge just politely told the boy emperor to retire. And he did.
Okay, let's do a quick pop quiz. A little recap of the key system changes we've just covered. See if you were paying attention. First up, what was Augustus's key reform? What was that big military change he made? That's right. He broke that dangerous link between soldiers and generals by creating a professional, state-funded army. Loyalty to the state, not the man.
And which group went from being bodyguards to the guys who were literally selling the emperorship? Yup, the Praetorian Guard, proving that in the end, military muscle in the capital beat every other kind of authority in Rome. And finally, what was that fatal economic blow to the Western Empire? What was the final nail in the coffin? The loss of North Africa, which just starved the state of the grain and the cash it desperately needed to fund its legions. So all this leaves us with a pretty fundamental question, doesn't it? The Roman systems we've talked about created unprecedented stability for centuries, but they still failed in the end. It just goes to show you that even the most powerful, most complex structures are ultimately fragile. And it makes you wonder, can any system really last forever?